Record on this. Hello, Charlie. Thank you for joining me today.
Good morning from Washington, D.C.
So, at the next board election, a new voting process will take place that is called ranked choice voting. And you were kind enough to help me put together a little video about the why and how it works and stuff like that. So the ranked choice voting, just need to change, has been decided to be used at the next board election. And the nomination committee this year is Chuck Wieselowski, who is the chair and immediate past president, and Sarab Saxena, who is the vice president. And you have been kind enough, I think, for the third year to be the member at large, Charlie.
I believe so, yes.
Yes. So, and you and I, we already started when I was the chair of the nominating committee 2 years ago to start talking about ranked choice. And we were testing it last year to see how it worked. It wasn't part of the board election last year, but we were just testing it. And one of the reasons why we are doing this is because the IFPUG bylaws, which is the rules that IFPUG is working under, is talking about the Robert Rules of Order. It's a very old Robert Rules of Order. So in the old version of the first version of the Robert Rules of Order, it didn't talk about ranked choice voting. But in the newest edition, the 12th edition, it now recommends to use ranked choice voting when we have board elections. And that's one of the reasons why we chose to do this. So the purpose of this presentation is for us to talk about what ranked choice method for voting is, and why this is now a part of the Robert Rules of Engagement to use this for board elections. We also want to share with those who listen in on this why the nomination committee sees this as an advantage compared to the simple plurality method that we used to use. So, Charlie, why don't you talk a little bit about the past voting method that we use, the plurality method?
Sure. Let's. I've built a small example here where we have four candidates, candidate A, B, C, and D, who are running for a single seat on the board, and we have 10 voters. Voter one chooses candidate A, that's their first choice. Voter two has candidate C as the first choice, and so forth. So with 10 votes that are being cast, candidate A has 4 out of the 10, or 40%. Candidate B has 20%, candidate C has 30%, and candidate D has 10%. So in this case, 40% wins. The only flip side of this is, although candidate A won with 40% of the votes, 60% of the people did not want candidate A to win. So with that in mind, we can use another way of doing the voting, which is called the ranked choice method. And let's flip to the next slide to show how that would work.
Yeah, but before we do that, Charlie,
Sure.
there's just one thing, because one of the ways that we have been voting when we had more than one candidate was also that if there was 2 or 3 candidates, people were just, voting for 3 candidates, some of them. and others was only voting for one candidate, and they didn't have the choice of saying, I would prefer that candidate A wins, and second candidate B, and third candidate C. So that's another way of plurality method. So we just tallied up the most voting, which might have been a bit of a screwed picture on it because we didn't have a first, second, and third choice. So, but if we go to the ranked choice voting, we do something else here, right?
Yes, each voter, we changed the rules, the voting rules a little bit. Each voter, in order for their vote to count, must make a first choice, a second preference, a third preference, and a fourth preference. So voter one prefers candidate A the most, so that's their first preference. Voter one wants candidate B as their second preference and puts second down. Third preference is candidate C, and voter one least prefers candidate D, so that's their fourth preference. Now for voter two least prefers candidate A, so that's their fourth preference. The second preference is candidate B. Their highest preference is candidate C, and their third preference was candidate D. And they vote, all of the voters vote accordingly. And that is the business rule for this, at this stage of the game here. So we're collecting all of the data and all of the votes at this point in time before we go to the next step.
And the idea here is that you cannot only vote for one candidate. You always need to basically rank all the candidates by the choice that you see them. So you need to both rank the ones that you have the first choice, and all the ones in the middle, and the one that you have the least choice. So if there were 6 candidates at an election, do you then have to only choose for 2 candidates, or do you need to choose for all candidates? So how is that
All
work?
candidates.
All candidates. So you need to rank all the candidates.
Yes. So if there were 6 candidates, you would have a fifth, and a sixth preference.
Good. So if we then go to the next step. So now everybody has made their ballots.
Now we scrub the data. And by scrubbing, we find that voter 6 only voted for one candidate. So voter 6's vote does not count anymore because they violated the business rules. And voter 7 only voted for 2 candidates. So voter 7's vote does not count anymore because it's invalid, because they did not vote for all candidates. So at this stage of the game, we now count up the first votes. We now have 8 qualified voters.
Yeah. And that means that,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That means that voter 6 and 7, because they didn't choose all to rank all the candidates, those are not valid.
Those are invalid votes, and those 2 voters and their votes are now removed from the voting process.
Yeah.
And we now have 8 valid voters.
And what we will try to do, of course, in the real ballot is to make sure that it's not an option to only vote rank 1 or 2 or 3 candidates, to make sure that people are given a warning to be told that they need to rank all candidates in order for the ballot to be valid. So we don't.
And that's one purpose of this presentation here, is to alert everybody that this is a new business rule for the voting.
Yeah.
So we look at the candidates now. Candidate A has, oh, can we go back, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes.
Candidate A now has 2 votes, so they have 25% of the vote. 22 out of 8, so they have 25% of the vote. Candidate B has 2 first place votes, so they have 25%. Candidate C has 3 first place votes, so they have 37.5% of the votes. And candidate D has 1 first place vote, and they have 12.5% of the votes. So candidate D is dropped out from the vote from the election process, and candidate D's first place vote now transfers to the individual who is their second place, which is candidate B. And on the next slide, we'll show how that works.
So we go to the next slide. So candidate D is now eliminated because they had the least first votes, right?
Right. And their first place, that candidate's first place vote goes to the second place vote, which was under candidate B. So at this iteration, candidate A still has 2 first place votes with 25%, and both candidate B and C have 3 first place votes at 37.5%. Candidate D drops out, so they don't count anymore.
And that also means that voter 10 who said, my first choice for candidate is D. When he's eliminated, voter 10's second choice is now an influencing factor to who is going to win the election.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
so now we have 2 equal candidates.
I'm sorry?
Now we got 2 equal candidates, B and C.
B and C are now equal. Candidate A has the least amount of votes. So candidate A will drop out. And candidate A's first preference will now go to their second preference. So voter 1, that vote will go now as a first place to candidate B, and voter 4's first place will now go to candidate B. And we'll show that on the next slide.
Before we go to the next slide, Charlie, you have no candidate has a majority, so iterative the process again. What do you mean with that sentence?
Well, by that I mean we're going to keep on doing this until one candidate gets more than 50% of the vote. No one has more than 50% of the vote right now.
Yeah. Good.
So we'll keep this iteration process going until one candidate has more than 50% of the vote.
Good. So let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so voter 1's vote now goes to first place for candidate B. Voter 4's first place vote goes to candidate B. And we'll now add up the first place votes. Candidate B has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 first place votes, or 62.5%. And candidate C has 3 first place votes, or 37.5%. So candidate B has now gone over 50%, and candidate B now wins the election because candidate B has the most preference among the voters.
Yeah. And the reason why voter 1 and voter 4 is now having candidate B as the first choice is again because they had candidate B as their second choice. So,
yes.
So it's always the second. And if we had to repeat this iteration because we had, more candidates than is shared here, the principle is exactly the same.
Yes. Now, it is possible that somebody who had a second place vote would be eliminated. So in that case, a first place vote would go to their third preference.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, it's the highest preference that's remaining.
Yeah.
That would be unlikely, but it's possible.
Yeah. And the idea here is to make sure that it's not by majority voting, but it's by preference voting. So the ranked preference that they are elected.
Right. The community prefers candidate B
Yeah.
more than candidates A, C, or D.
Yeah. Good.
And we can do this process if we have two votes, if we have two board openings, or 3 board openings, or whatever it might be.
So if there were 2 board votings and we had 4 candidates, in this case it would be candidate B and candidate C that would be elected for the board.
Yeah, as soon as somebody goes over 50%, the iterations stop and you take the top 2.
Yep. Good. So thank you for that explanation, Charlie. So the new ranked choice voting will be effective at the board voting process for 2024. So you will see this. And if you got any questions about the voting process, you can send an email to ifpug@ifpug.org. Thank you so much for listening in to Charlie and I trying to explain to you the ranked choice voting process and why the nomination board of 2024 has decided to use this as their preferred voting process for this year's election for the board. Bye bye.